In the last exercise, we created a variable to store the value that was calculated by Alice. In that case, it was the distance between a girl and a horse, and we stored it in a variable we created called distance to horse. Variables are also used to store user-entered data, which is what we're going to be doing in the next exercise. We are going to be calculating a hypotenuse length, that is the longer edge of a right triangle. The length can be calculated using the Pythagorean theorem, which if you look in your textbook on page 74, it shows it to you. And it looks like this. It basically says, let me pull this up, basically says that given the lengths of two edges of the right triangle, edge A and edge B, you can calculate edge C, which is the hypotenuse, by taking the square root of a squared plus b squared. It's not important that you understand all this math. All you have to do is follow that formula and put it in Alice and have them do the calculations. So going back to Alice, our user story is that we have a girl that can calculate the hypotenuse in her head. So scene, there's a girl on the screen. She says, I can calculate hypotenuse lengths in my head. Then she says, give me the lengths of two edges of a right triangle. A dialog box appears, prompting us for the first edge length. When we enter it, a second dialog box appears, prompting us for the second edge length. When we enter that, the girl says the hypotenuse length is x, where x would be the correct answer. So the nouns in our story are the girl, and then we need to know the hypotenuse length so that she can say the answer. We need to know the length of the first edge, the second edge, and we'll need two dialog boxes so the user can tell us what those lengths are. So for the girl in this story, we're going to use Skater Girl. So click Add Objects in a new world, and I believe she is in the People gallery. So scroll over, it's alphabetical, and find People, and then alphabetically again we want to go to the S's. Right, and she is technically the only thing in our world. All our other objects are going to be variables. They're going to be storing values for us. So it's okay to zoom in on her. Use the blue camera controls to zoom in. Just make sure you leave enough space above her head for these word bubbles to appear. I'm going to rotate her a little bit. And then that's the only object we have to put in the world. So you can click Done. And again, let's go back to the Pythagorean theorem we're going to be using for this, or the girl is going to be using. We're going to have the users enter the values of A and B, and then we're going to have Alice calculate the length of C using the Pythagorean theorem, which it's written here as C equals the square root of A squared plus B squared. It could also be written as C equals the square root of A times A, which is A squared, plus B times B. That's one way to write it out all in one line, which is what you have to do in programming. We don't use these fancy symbols when we start writing code. We write it out like this. And then consider that in this case, when we're using this formula, C is actually the hypotenuse. That's the answer that we're looking for. Edge A we'll call edge 1, and edge B, and B we'll call edge 2. So when you write it out in the code, it's going to say hypotenuse equals the square root of edge 1 times edge 1 plus edge 2 times edge 2. And that's all we have to put in the code. And like I said, you don't have to understand this math. You just have to be able to build this formula as it's written in your book and as I've got it written right here. All right, so going back to Alice. We have got our girl, and our other objects are going to be variables. So let's create a method to hold all of this. This is something the Skater Girl can do, so select her, and let's create a new object method for the Skater Girl. We'll call it compute hypotenuse. And hypotenuse is Hypotenuse. Compute hypotenuse is a new object method belonging to the Skater Girl. You get the new tab up top, a new tile on the left. All right, so the nouns in this story are the girl, the hypotenuse length, the edge 1 length, edge 2 length. So let's go ahead and create variables to hold those three items. So let's create a variable and name it hypotenuse. This is the number that will be calculated, so it is a number data type. We'll leave the initial value at 1 because it will be set up in the code to be the formula that we looked at on the other page. Click OK. And then our other two objects are the lengths of the two edges of the right triangle. So create a new variable called edge 1. It is also going to be a number, and we're going to be asking the user for the value of edge 1. What is the length of edge 1 of the triangle? So just leave the 1 as a placeholder and click OK, and create our third and final variable called edge 2. It is a number, leave the value at 1 and click OK. Alright, let's start out with the easy part. Pull up and do an order. The first couple of lines are just her saying what she can do. So with the Skater Girl selected, drag over a say statement. Other, she'll say, I can calculate hypotenuse lengths in my head. And put a 3-second duration on that so it stays on screen long enough for the user to read it. Okay, and the next line is also a say statement, so drag that over. Other, give me the lengths of 2 edges of a right triangle. Give that one a 3-second duration as well. Alright, the next thing we want to do is we want a dialog box to come up and at the user enter a value. Enter the length of the first edge. And then we want to store whatever they enter in this edge 1 variable. So in order to get this information from a user, anytime you need to do something or need some line of code you can't figure out where it is in Alice, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be under World Functions. So if you look under World Functions, you'll see that you have in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grouping an Ask User section. You can ask user for a number in number dialog. You can ask them a true or false in Boolean dialog, and you can ask them to type in a string in the string dialog. So we're going to be using this ask user for a number, and then we want to store it in the edge 1 variable. So we're going to work backwards basically. We're going to pull down edge 1, so pull that tile down, and we're going to set the value to a placeholder of 1. And this is similar to what we did with the girls and the horse, where we were trying to set the value of the distance to horse, and we set it to a placeholder, and then we used Alice functions to actually get the value. Similar to that, we're going to choose edge 1, pull it down, set the value to a placeholder of 1, and then this time we'll use the world function number dialog, pull that over, drag and drop it on our placeholder of 1, and now you have to decide what question is going to be asked in this dialog box. So default is enter a number. We're going to change this to other, and we'll have the dialog box say enter the first edge length. Click OK. All right, so now if you look on the screen, edge 1 has a value of whatever is entered in this number dialog box. We're going to do the same exact thing for edge 2. So first a dialog box comes up, the user enters a number that is stored in edge 1. Then we're going to have another dialog box pop up, so pull down edge 2 as line 4 of your code, set the value to a placeholder of 1, and then under World Functions, again pull over this number dialog box to replace your placeholder of 1. This time the question we want in the dialog box will be other, enter the second edge length. And you don't have to worry about a duration with these because the dialog box will stay up until a user enters the number and clicks OK or hits enter. Alright, so we have the value of edge 1, we have the value of edge 2. We're going to use those values, as I showed you here, to calculate what the hypotenuse is, and then the girl can say the number. So going back to Alice, line 5, we will set the value of hypotenuse. And this is where it gets a little tricky. We have to build this formula, Pythagorean theorem, piece by piece in Alice. If you're writing it out, hand coding it in Java, then you would just type away. But because it's Alice, we have to do it piece by piece by piece. So let's start out by pulling down the hypotenuse tile and choosing set value. And we're going to start out Let me switch over real quick. This is what it's going to look like. Hypotenuse set value, it will be the square root of edge 1 times edge 1 plus edge 2 times edge 2. So we're going to do this one piece at a time. We'll start with the square root, and then we'll build edge 1 times edge 1. We'll add that to edge 2 times edge 2. So in Alice, pull down hypotenuse, set the value, and let's put a placeholder of 1. Remember, our formula starts with square root. So again, anytime you can't figure out where you'd find something in Alice, it's under World Functions. So go to World Functions and scroll down to Advanced Math group, and you should find a square root option. That's super square root. Too far. Here we go. It is the fourth one down, math square root of A. So we're going to pull that, drag and drop it on our placeholder of 1, and now we've got math square root of 1. And building piece by piece, we are right here. We need to add and change that square root of 1 to be square root of edge 1 times edge 1 plus edge 2 times edge 2. So take that 1, click the drop down arrow, and let's change that 1 to the expression edge 1. Alright, and again, we're going to build this piece by piece. So click the drop down arrow beside edge 1, and remember we have these math options here. We're going to choose math edge 1 times the expression edge 1. Alright, so that gets us to this far. Now we need to add edge 2 times edge 2. So this part is very important that you look. You've got 3 different drop down arrows. We want edge 1 times edge 1 to stay together in parentheses. So we're going to use this second middle drop down arrow so that we can choose math and add the whole parenthetical operation, edge 1 times edge 1. We want to add that to and choose expression edge 2. Alright, and then the very last step, we want it to actually be edge 2 times edge 2. So choose the arrow right beside edge 2 and choose math and edge 2 times, the third one down, the expression edge 2. So carefully look at your formula when you finish this up. It should be square root, opening parentheses, then edge 1 times edge 1 plus parentheses edge 2 times edge 2, closing parentheses for this section, closing parentheses for the square root. If you have this formula set up wrong, it will give you the wrong answer. It will not calculate accurately. So the important thing is make sure you're clicking the drop down arrow when you're building this next to the item you want to add something to. In this case, we wanted, in the middle, we wanted to add something to edge 1 times edge 1, so we had to click the drop down arrow after the parentheses. The last half we wanted to multiply edge 2 times edge 2, so we had to click the drop down arrow right beside edge 2. So again, review this section of the video as many times as necessary, and I've also got stills, screenshots I've taken in the hypotenuse assignment in Moodle. So it's very important you get this hypotenuse line correct. Once you have it set up correctly, all that's left now is we have the answer. The user has entered edge 1, they've entered edge 2. The value of hypotenuse is now, using that formula, the correct answer. We need the girl to give the answer. However, here we come into the problem with data typing. The type of data stored in hypotenuse is a number, and characters in Alice cannot say numbers. They can only say strings. So the way to tell apart the different data types, the numbers and strings, is think which would I type into a word processor, which would I type into a calculator. If you're going to type into a calculator, it should be a number data type. You can do math on it. You can multiply and divide it, etc. If it's going to be in a word processor, it's going to be in a speech bubble, it needs to be a string data type. So what we need to do now is change that hypotenuse from the number data type, which it is, into a string so that the girl can say it. So and then once we change it into a string, we need a place to store that value. So we're going to create a fourth and final variable for this method. So create new variable, and we'll call this hypot string, which is just the hypotenuse as a string. The data type, of course, will be other string. You can leave its initial value default string, so we need to set that. Click OK. All right, and then pull hypot string down into the code underneath that long hypotenuse line, and set the value to placeholder of default string. What we really want hypot_string to be is hypotenuse changed over to a string. And again, if you don't know where to find the code you're looking for, it's probably in world functions. And if you look in world functions in the 1, 2, 3, 4th grouping, you see the string section. These are 2 different things you can do with strings. We're going to be using both in this exercise. The second line of code, the second world function under string, lets you change an item to a string. It says what to string. So let's drag and drop what to string onto our placeholder default string. And it's going to say, okay, what are we changing to a string? We are changing the expression hypotenuse. So that one line of code does all of that. It takes the value of hypotenuse, which is a number, changes it to a string, and then stores it in a variable we created called hypotstring. Right? The last thing we need to do is have the girl say this. Now that it's a string value, she can say what the value of hypotenuse is. But we don't just want her blurting out an answer. We want her to say the value of the hypotenuse length is, and then say the answer. So switch to Skater Girl's methods, drag over a say statement, is your last line of code. Other, she's going to say the hypotenuse length is, and then hit the space bar so that there's a blank space after the word is. Click OK. And now we need to join this string we've just typed with the value of the variable hypotstring. And when you join strings and variables together, that is called concatenating. You're going to do this over and over and over. And the concatenation operator is under world functions. So switch to world functions, and I said that we were going to use both of the functions under the string category. We already did what to string. Now we're going to use this a plus b, which is a concatenation operator. Drag a plus b on top of the string you've already typed, where it says the hypotenuse length is. When it turns green, you can drop it, and it's going to say, okay, what is b? What is the second part you're adding to the statement? And we're going to be adding the expression hypotstring. So when you see it on the screen, it says the hypotenuse length is, and then a blank space that is joined with hypotstring, because otherwise the word is and the number that the girl is going to say would not have a space between them. They'd be jammed up. So whenever you're using this concatenation operator to join strings and variables, make sure you click in the string part of the statement and that there's a blank space to separate the string you've typed and the variable. All right, the whole thing is done now. Click enter to finish that. She asked the user for the first edge length, asked the user for the second edge length. Calculation is done that determines what the value of hypotenuse is. It's changed into a string, and then she says the hypotenuse length is and says the answer. So all we have to do is go to my first method and select the skater girl and pull over this new compute hypotenuse method to test it. All right, and to test this, to make sure we got our hypotenuse line of code correct, we're going to enter 3 and 5. So for the first edge length, enter 3 and click OK or hit enter. And then the second one should be 5. Okay, that was wrong. I think it was supposed to be 3 or 4. Yep, my bad. All right, I'm going to restart it. All right, so we're going to enter 3 and 4. So the first edge length is 3. Second length is 4. The hypotenuse answer will be 5. You can also do 6 and 8, and the answer will be 10. So she says I can calculate them in my head. Give me the value. And then first dialog box, I'm going to enter 6. Second dialog box, I'm going to enter 8, and I should get 10 for an answer. And space between hypotenuse length is and the actual answer. The only thing we left out here is there should be a duration on that last statement. It looks like 5 seconds. So I'm going to go to compute hypotenuse, and on the last line of the code in there, I'm going to hit more duration and give it a 5-second duration. And that way the answer stays on the screen long enough to see it and read it. All right, then we're going to save this file as your last name, first initial, and then hypotenuse. Again, that is HYPOTENUSE. And upload this into Moodle. Again, I've gone through step by step how to do this hypotenuse line of code and also to do the hypotstring line of code. in the hypotenuse assignment itself. If you click on that, you can see little screenshots of how to build these two statements step by step.